She walked into Black Ridge Special Operations Base carrying a rifle case and a transfer order. They laughed before she reached the door. Iron Wolf, someone said, dripping sarcasm. That's what they're calling her. More laughter. The kind that fills a room and poisons everything it touches. 48 hours later, the most feared SEAL commander on the continent stood in a silent courtyard, spine straight, hand raised in a full military salute, aimed directly at the woman he had humiliated. But that's not the story. The real story is what happened in between, and what was waiting for her long before she ever arrived. Subscribe now, because this channel tells the stories they don't want on the record. Hit like, drop your city and country in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this one travels. The transport helicopter came in low over the ridge just after Euro 5:30, running without lights. Below, Black Ridge Special Operations Base sat like a fist pressed into the Carrick mountain range, a cluster of reinforced buildings, satellite arrays, and blast walls carved into terrain that had no business supporting human life. The wind at this altitude didn't blow so much as push, a constant lateral force that made every exposed surface vibrate at its own miserable frequency. The steel walls of the operations building groaned when gusts came off the northern face. Nobody who worked there ever stopped noticing it. They just stopped mentioning it. The helicopter set down on the secondary pad, not the main landing zone, which said something about the priority of this arrival. And the rotors hadn't even finished spooling before the ground crew was already walking away. First Lieutenant Emily Hayes stepped off alone. No escort, no welcome. A single duffel over one shoulder and a Pelican case in her right hand, the kind built to protect a long rifle during transport. She was 29 years old, lean in the way that came from years of field rations rather than gym discipline, with dark circles under her eyes from the connecting flights that had gotten her here via 2 staging bases and a prop plane that smelled like diesel fuel and bad decisions. Her uniform was pressed. She'd done that herself at the last layover. But her boots were worn at the outer heel in a way that suggested she walked slightly favoring her right leg. An old injury, or a habit. Nobody there yet knew which. She stood on the landing pad for a moment, scanning the base with the particular kind of patience that came from spending long hours behind a scope. Not looking for anything specific, just learning the shape of things. Then she picked up her case and walked toward the operations building. The briefing room smelled like coffee that had been on the burner since the previous shift. 12 operators were seated when Emily entered, and the room temperature dropped by 3 degrees. Not from any system change, but from the simple physics of people going quiet at the same moment. Several conversations stopped mid-sentence. One man, big, sandy-haired, a chief petty officer's insignia on his chest, leaned toward the operator beside him and said something too low to hear clearly. The other man smirked. Emily sat in the open chair at the far end of the table. She set her Pelican case beside her chair and folded her hands on the table surface and waited. Colonel Logan Pierce entered 2 minutes later. He was exactly what the file photo had suggested, and somehow also more, a compact, angular man with a face like weathered stone, the kind of person whose expressions didn't shift much, but whose eyes moved constantly, cataloging. He had 3 combat deployments in the Carrick region alone, 2 distinguished service medals, and a reputation that preceded him through every special operations command in the theater. The operators in the room didn't straighten when he entered. They just became still, which was different. Pierce walked to the head of the table, set down a manila folder, and looked at Emily the way a person looks at something placed in the wrong drawer. "Lieutenant Hayes," he said, "you know why you're here." "Transfer orders, sir." "Ghost Spear Task Unit, Provisional Attachment Pending Field Evaluation." "Provisional." He said the word like he was confirming a diagnosis. "That's accurate. You'll remain provisional until I say otherwise, which may be a while." He let that settle. "You want to know what I think?" Pierce continued, not waiting for an answer. "I think someone in a comfortable office decided this unit needed a specific kind of diversity in its personnel roster. I think that someone made calls. I think those calls moved paper, and I think paper moved you here." He looked around the table briefly, then back at her. "I've been doing this for 16 years. I've seen that process produce some useful operators. I've also seen it produce problems. Right now, I don't know which one you are." The sandy-haired chief, his name tape read Darko, didn't bother lowering his voice this time. "Iron Wolf," he said quietly, and someone at the table covered a laugh with a cough. Emily looked at him directly. Is that for me? Darko spread his hand slightly. Call sign we heard coming through channels. Figured someone had a sense of humor. I've had worse. I bet you have. Pierce's gaze moved between them with the patience of a man who'd let this particular kind of exchange play out before and knew exactly when to cut it off. He held it 2 more seconds, then refocused on the room. Ghost Spear has a mission window opening in 72 hours. Between now and then, Lieutenant Hayes will run through evaluation sequence on the range and in the field. She performs, she participates. She doesn't, she goes back on the next transport. He closed the manila folder. That's the only variable we're managing right now. Questions? Nobody had questions. Emily had one. Sir, what's the mission profile? Pierce looked at her for a moment that stretched just slightly too long. Extraction, he said. Mountains. We'll brief full details at the 48-hour mark. He pushed back from the table. Get her settled, Darko. Armory issue at 0800. He left without looking at her again. The bunk room they assigned Emily was technically designated for visiting personnel, a small room at the end of the east corridor with a narrow metal bed frame, a wall locker that had been repainted over old unit patches, and a single high window that let in exactly enough morning light to make the room feel cold instead of dark. Someone had scratched into the lower bunk frame, 4th time's the charm. She didn't know what it referred to and didn't ask. Darko walked her there himself, which was less hospitality and more inspection. He wanted to see how she handled being given the worst room on the corridor without complaint. Bathroom's at the end, he said from the doorway. Hot water until 0630, then it's your problem. Mess opens at 0545, but the good stuff's gone by 0600. You'll learn. Understood. He started to leave, then paused with his shoulder against the door frame. For what it's worth, he said, I've got nothing personal against you. I just don't know you. And on this unit, not knowing someone is the same as not trusting them. That's just math. Emily set her duffel on the bed and unzipped the top flap. That's reasonable, she said. Same math works both directions. He studied her for a moment, long enough that she looked up. Where were you before this? He asked. Bragg, then 2 rotations in country, mountain reconnaissance, sniper support. What's your confirmed number? She didn't answer immediately, not because she was calculating. The number lived in a specific part of her memory she'd learned to access carefully, because she was deciding whether he was asking to connect with her or to measure her. There was a difference. 11, she said. Longest shot at 1460 meters. The others were field work. Darko's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. Right, he said. Then, 0800, Armory. He left. Emily stood in the quiet room and listened to the mountain wind against the high window. It was relentless and toneless and strangely honest. It pushed at everything equally, without preference. She respected that. She pulled out a small photo she kept folded in the interior pocket of her duffel and looked at it briefly. Her older brother Marcus in his dress uniform, grinning at the camera with the specific joy of someone who had never once second-guessed his choices. He'd died on a mountain not unlike this one, 4 years ago, in circumstances that were still classified. She'd been 3 months into her sniper certification at the time. She folded the photo and put it back. Then she opened the Pelican case and began conducting her own inspection of the rifle before the armory could issue her a replacement. The range at Black Ridge ran 700 meters along the eastern face of the mountain, carved into a natural shelf that gave it protection from the worst crosswinds but still left operators dealing with variable gusts off the rock face. It was a legitimate challenge at distance, the kind of range where reading the air mattered as much as trigger discipline. Emily arrived at 0755. The armory sergeant, a lean, efficient man named Corporal Webb, who seemed congenitally incapable of enthusiasm, issued her a rifle from the evaluation pool. She picked it up and immediately noticed the scope mount had a slight cant that hadn't been corrected. The adjustment turrets were stiff in a way that suggested they'd been exposed to moisture. The bipod had a rattle in the left leg. She set it down on the bench and stood back from it. Problem? Webb asked. This rifle has a scope cant of approximately 2 to 3 degrees. The elevation turret has moisture contamination. I'd estimate 6 to 8 clicks of inconsistency above 500 meters, and the bipod leg is going to give me a half-inch shift at distance. Webb blinked. That's standard issue for eval. For everyone? He consulted his clipboard with the kind of attention that meant he didn't need to consult it. Yes. It wasn't yes. She could tell by the pause before the word. The rifles hanging in the rack behind him were clearly newer models, calibrated tags still attached, spines pristine. The one in front of her was from a different row entirely. She looked at it for a moment. Then she picked it back up. Fine, she said. I'll work with it. Darko was watching from the edge of the range bay. He'd expected a complaint. He'd wanted one. Not from cruelty, precisely, but because a complaint was information. A person who complained about equipment before they'd fired a round was a certain type of operator, and he'd already been building that file in his head. She hadn't given it to him. Emily set up at the 700-meter station, which was not where they'd told her to start. Evaluation protocol typically began at 300 and walked out. She ignored the protocol and built her firing position with the practiced economy of someone who'd done it on actual mountainsides with actual consequences. Bipod adjusted for the slight grade, body angle compensating for the rattle in the left leg, spotting scope set as a reference but not depended on. She fired 3 rounds at 700 meters. 2 center hits, 1 a centimeter right. She made a single adjustment, not to the turret, but to her cheek weld, and fired 3 more. All center. Then she moved to the 900-meter station without being told and repeated the sequence. The downrange target evaluation came back over the range radio with a silence that lasted long enough to be its own kind of answer. 6 rounds, the range officer said finally. 900 meters, 5 center mass, 1 low center, crosswind at 14 knots. Darko was no longer leaning against the wall. Pierce had arrived at the range bay at some point during the sequence. Emily hadn't noticed exactly when, and stood with his arms crossed and his jaw set in a way that could have meant several different things. She's lucky, said a voice behind him. An operator named Kessler, heavy-framed and direct, who had expressed his opinion of the transfer arrangement within the first hour of her arrival. Wind dropped. She caught a window. Wind was consistent, said the range officer, who was reading his own anemometer. She accounted for it. Nobody said anything else. Emily cleared her rifle, safed it, and carried it back to the bench. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. That was the one thing about her that had never required effort, even when everything else did. Over the next 2 days, the evaluation sequence continued. There were 4 land nav exercises. Emily completed each one ahead of standard time, including the 3rd course, which had, as she discovered mid-route, a landmark missing from her map that was clearly present in the maps issued to other operators. She adapted without calling it in. There were 2 radio protocol evaluations. On the first, her assigned frequency produced static interference that nobody else reported. She switched to backup protocol without acknowledgement and completed the exercise. On the second, the frequency was correct, but someone had altered the authentication codes in her packet. She noticed the discrepancy 14 seconds in, switched to base authentication, and completed the exercise 3 minutes behind schedule. In the debrief, Pierce noted the delay. 3 minutes is unacceptable on an active mission, he said. My authentication packet had been altered, sir. That's a serious accusation, Lieutenant. It's an observation. I'm happy to produce the original packet. Silence. I'll look into it, Pierce said, in the tone of someone who had not yet decided whether to. The whisper network that ran through every military unit, faster and more reliable than most official communications, had already rendered its judgment by day 2. Emily heard pieces of it in corridors and through thin walls. She's not here because she earned it. Someone made calls. Congressional thing, probably. Her scores are decent, but decent doesn't cut it here. Pierce is going to send her back. She ate her meals alone, which was her preference regardless of social dynamics. She cleaned her rifle at night, sitting cross-legged on the bunk room floor. She slept 6 hours, exactly. A discipline she'd built during mountain reconnaissance when rest windows were dictated by patrol schedules rather than fatigue. She said nothing about the equipment irregularities to anyone beyond Pierce. She did not complain, but she logged everything. A small olive-drab notebook, written in the compressed shorthand she'd developed over years in the field. Dates, times, discrepancies, equipment serial numbers, frequency logs. Not accusatory, just accurate. On the morning of day 3, Pierce called her into his office. It was a small room. A CO's office on a forward base was never anything otherwise. with a tactical display along one wall, a desk covered in organized stacks of mission documentation, and a window that faced directly into the mountain wind. Pierce stood rather than sat, which meant this wasn't going to be a long conversation. "Qualification day tomorrow," he said. "The long-range sequence." "Yes, sir." "I want to be clear with you, Hayes. I don't have political problems. I don't manage congressional requests. I don't make accommodations for transfers that came with strings I didn't see. You understand?" "I understand, sir." "If you don't qualify, you're gone. If you qualify and you can't operate at team standard, you're gone. There's no version of this where you stay because it would be awkward to send you back." "I'd expect nothing different." He studied her the way he'd studied her in the briefing room. That same flat, cataloging gaze. "You're not going to tell me about the equipment issues," he said. Emily paused. "I reported the authentication packet discrepancy, sir." The rifle, the maps, the frequency." She looked at him for a moment. "I assumed you knew." "Why?" "Because nothing on this base happens without a CO's awareness. Either you authorized the conditions I was given, or someone bypassed your authority to arrange them. Either way, I figured the information was already in your possession." Something shifted in Pierce's expression. Not warmth, exactly, but a recalibration. He looked at the window. "Go prepare for qualification," he said. She left. He stayed at the window longer than he needed to, watching the mountain wind move through the antenna arrays outside. He'd told himself the evaluation conditions were standard. He'd believed it because it was easier to believe it and because he had 30 other things demanding his attention. But standing here now, replaying what she'd just said, he felt the edges of something he didn't like starting to form in the back of his mind. He filed it away. Tomorrow was qualification day. The long-range qualification course at Black Ridge ran from 800 to 1100 meters, 5 target positions at each distance. Wind data provided, but conditions variable. The standard score for unit acceptance was 40 out of 50, which sounded achievable until you were on a mountain shelf with a 17-knot variable crosswind and a rifle that had not been perfectly dialed. Emily arrived at the range at 0700. The rifle waiting at her station was the same unit-issue weapon from the initial evaluation, the same one with the scope cant and the moisture contamination. Every other operator on the course had new calibrated equipment. She could see the calibration tags on Darko's rifle from 3 stations away. She checked her issued weapon. The scope cant was slightly worse than it had been. Someone had adjusted the mount incorrectly in the intervening period, or hadn't adjusted it and had bumped it. The elevation turret's resistance had increased. The bipod rattle was unchanged. She set it down, picked it up again. Darko watched her from his station. He wasn't smirking now. The course began at 0720, 800 meters first. Variable wind, roughly 12 to 14 knots with occasional gusts to 18. Emily built her position, read the wind with the same still patience she'd been applying since she was 22 years old, lying in mud outside a training range at Bragg, and fired. The group she put on the target at 800 meters was tight enough that 2 of the 5 rounds were touching. Nobody said anything. 900 meters. The wind picked up. She held off for a gust, let the air settle into its base pattern, fired the sequence in measured intervals that the other operators clocked instinctively, all 5 on the steel. At 1,000 meters, she slowed down. Not because of uncertainty, because the scope cant was introducing a consistent error she needed to calculate manually, correcting it through hold technique rather than adjustment, which required a degree of mental triangulation that was simply slower than dialing. She knew exactly what she was compensating for. She applied the compensation. She fired. 4 center hits, 1, 2 centimeters right. The range officer read the results over the radio. At the range observation post, Pierce had positioned himself without explanation. He stood with a spotting scope and said nothing. 1,100 meters. The wind at this distance on this mountain face was not a simple variable. It came in layers. Base current running roughly left to right at 18 to 20 knots. A secondary deflection off the rock face above adding a downward component. Occasional thermal updrafts as the morning sun hit the south-facing stone. Emily lay behind the rifle and spent 40 seconds doing nothing except watching a piece of range tape she'd affixed to a stake at the 200-meter mark. She was reading depth of the wind, not just its face. Darko, who had finished his own course and come to stand at the rear of the observation line, watched her stillness and said nothing. She fired. 5 rounds. 5 center hits. The silence from the range radio lasted 6 full seconds. 48 out of 50, the range officer said. Lieutenant Hayes. The number settled over the range like something falling from a height. 48. The course record for a first qualification attempt at Black Ridge was 46, set 4 years prior by an operator who was now running his own team in a different theater. Pierce lowered the spotting scope slowly. Darko had his arms crossed and was looking at the 1,100-meter target, which required looking through 2 sets of range optics to see from the observation post. Kessler said from somewhere behind the group, "Wind dropped for her." "Wind was 18 to 22 consistent," the range officer said flatly, "for the full sequence." Kessler didn't respond. Pierce looked at Emily, who was clearing her rifle with the same efficiency she'd shown every other time. No ceremony, no acknowledgement of the score, no glance toward the observation post to gauge reaction. She was already running the bolt back, clearing the chamber, beginning the breakdown sequence. "Targets don't shoot back," Pierce said. He said it quietly, almost to himself, as if he was testing the weight of his own words now that he'd heard the score. They were the same words he'd spoken in the briefing room 2 days ago. Standing here, they felt different. The mission briefing came 3 hours later. Full Ghost Spear complement, the Tactical Operations Center, every screen active. The intelligence officer, a young captain named Brennan, who had the specific nervous energy of someone reading from a document he hadn't fully verified, walked through the operational overview with a laser pointer and a pace that left no room for questions. A high-value target was being held in a forward compound in the northeastern Carrick Valley. 2 armed factions, approximately 40 personnel. Ghost Spear's task was to extract an Allied intelligence asset before a prisoner transfer scheduled for 0300 the following morning. The route was displayed. The compound was displayed. Enemy positions were marked. Emily studied the map. Something bothered her about the enemy disposition. The fighting positions were spread in a pattern that looked correct on paper, but didn't account for the actual terrain features of the valley she was looking at. She knew this valley. Not from personal experience, but from the reconnaissance photography she'd spent 2 hours studying since she'd arrived at Black Ridge, going through the base's intelligence library in the evenings, when the rest of the unit was in the common room. The positions on the map were oriented as if the valley ran north-south. The valley ran northeast-southwest. It wasn't a catastrophic error, but it was an error. She waited until the briefing ended and operators were moving out of the TOC. "Captain Brennan," she said, "the enemy positions at grid reference 473. The valley orientation on the satellite overlay doesn't match the terrain imagery." Brennan looked at her with the polite wariness of someone who did not want to be corrected. "The imagery was current as of 48 hours ago," he said. "The imagery is fine. The orientation overlay is off. The valley runs northeast-southwest. The positions are marked as if it runs north-south. At this distance and angle that shifts the estimated fighting position by about 60 to 80 meters. Brennan looked at the map. He looked at it for long enough that she knew he was seeing it too. "I'll review it before final ops order," he said. "Thank you, Lieutenant." He said it in a tone that suggested the review would happen and the correction would be made, and Emily would never be thanked by name for it. She walked out of the TOC into the late afternoon light. Darko was leaning against the exterior wall, arms crossed, apparently studying the mountains. "You pointed out the overlay error," he said. "It wasn't a question. Sound traveled in these concrete corridors. Someone would have caught it." "Maybe." He was quiet for a moment. "Maybe not at the right time." Emily looked at the mountain line. The sun was moving behind the western ridge, pulling the temperature down by degrees. Tomorrow night she'd be somewhere in that range, 900 meters above a valley, with a variable wind and a rifle she wasn't certain she entirely trusted. "You're going to be on the overwatch," Darko said. "Pierce is going to put you on the high position." "I figured." "Alone." "Also figured." He looked at her sidelong. "That doesn't bother you." "I've been alone in Overwatch before." "Not for this unit." "Still applies." He pushed off from the wall and started walking. Then he stopped and half-turned. 48, he said. "That's the score." "That's the score." "With that rifle." She didn't answer. The answer was in the score. Darko looked at her for a moment longer than he had before. Still not warmth, still not trust. But something had shifted in the math he'd described his first night. the math that made unknown equal to untrusted. The equation was beginning to carry a new variable. He walked away. Emily stood in the cooling mountain air and felt the wind on her face and thought about the map with the incorrect overlay, about the rifle with the scope cant, about the authentication codes that had been altered, about the landmark missing from the navigation exercise. She thought about them the way she thought about patterns in terrain, individually unremarkable, collectively significant. She pulled the olive drab notebook from her breast pocket, added 3 lines, folded it, put it back. Then she went to clean her rifle one more time before the mission. At 23:40 that night, an encrypted message arrived in Brigadier General Victor Harrow's secure inbox at Rear Command. It was flagged personal, eyes only. It contained 4 words. She qualified. 48. Harrow read it once, set it down on his desk, looked at the operational map of the Carrick Mountains spread across the table in front of him. The one his staff had quietly altered before it was passed down the chain, coordinates adjusted by 90 meters in the northeastern valley, enemy strength reduced by 30%, fighting positions shifted to create a perfect corridor of fire for what was supposed to be a disaster that looked like intelligence failure. He'd chosen Emily Hayes for a specific reason. New to the unit, no allies, female in a Tier 1 environment, easy to dismiss, easy to blame. If Ghost Spear walked into a kill zone and the team was decimated, the narrative practically wrote itself. An inexperienced experimental sniper had misread the battlefield, had frozen at the critical moment, had failed the team that had never trusted her in the first place. The paperwork was already half-drafted, but 48 out of 50, with that rifle, in those conditions. Harrow sat back in his chair. He looked at the message again. Then he looked at the map. She'll still be alone on the high position, he thought. Alone and isolated doesn't matter how good her eye is. He reached for his secure phone. The mission proceeds as planned, he said when the line connected. All parameters remain in effect. Make sure the lieutenant's radio frequency is correct in the mission packet. A pause on the line. Sir, her frequency is already... Make sure it's correct, Harrow repeated, and his voice had the specific quality of someone communicating 2 different instructions at once. The line went quiet. Understood, sir, said the voice. It'll be handled. The call ended at 23:47. Harrow set the secure phone down on the edge of the map table and looked at the Carrick range for a long time without moving. Outside his rear command building, a generator hummed at its steady, indifferent frequency. The mountains in the satellite imagery were pale and dimensionless under the overhead light, shapes without weight, terrain without consequence. He'd been looking at maps long enough that sometimes he forgot they represented places where people actually died. He didn't spend long on that thought. He rolled the map closed, clipped it, and went to bed. Emily was awake at 4:30, not because of anxiety. Anxiety was a thing she'd learned to quarantine in a specific mental compartment years ago, sealed off the way you'd seal a room with a gas leak, not ignored but not indulged. She was awake because her body had long since recalibrated to pre-mission rhythm, an internal clock that ran slightly ahead of necessity so that she arrived at every critical moment already settled. She lay on the narrow bunk for 6 minutes. Then she got up. The base was not quiet. Forward operating bases were never quiet. Always some layer of mechanical noise, shift change footsteps, a radio crackling somewhere down a corridor. But the operations building had a specific 0430 stillness that was different from the noise underneath it. She'd noticed it the first morning and found it useful. She pulled on her base layer, then her uniform, then sat on the floor with her rifle across her lap. She'd field stripped it and cleaned it the night before. She did it again now. Not because it needed it, because in 12 hours she'd be on a mountain shelf in the dark with this particular weapon and this particular scope clamp, and she needed to know the feel of every component the way she knew her own hands. The bipod rattle. She'd shimmed it with a piece of paracord wrapped tight against the locking collar. Not a fix, but a mitigation. She'd tested at the pre-mission 0 before they inserted. The scope cant she couldn't correct without a mount tool she hadn't been issued. She'd already calculated the compensation. At 1100 meters, a 2-degree cant introduced approximately a 4-centimeter lateral error. She'd mapped the correction to a specific hold point that lived in her memory now, filed under this rifle's serial number, this particular deficiency. This was not how equipment was supposed to work. She noted it in the olive drab notebook and kept cleaning. The pre-mission brief assembled at 0800 in the TOC. Captain Brennan had corrected the valley orientation overlay. Emily saw the updated map when it was posted and felt the quiet satisfaction of a problem solved, followed immediately by the awareness that nobody in the room would ever connect the correction to her observation. That was fine. The team moving through the correct valley mattered more than the credit. Pierce ran the brief himself, methodical and specific. Ghost Spear would insert via 2 helicopters at a staging LZ approximately 4 kilometers from the target compound. The main assault element, 10 operators under Darko's tactical lead, would approach from the southwest along a dry creek drainage. Emily would be dropped at a secondary LZ 600 meters higher up the ridgeline and would move on foot to the Overwatch position, a natural rock shelf at approximately 900 meters elevation above the valley floor. Her radio call sign for the mission was Wolf Actual. She noticed that without expression. The insertion window was 2100. The prisoner transfer they were interrupting was scheduled for 0300. That gave Ghost Spear 6 hours to move, establish positions, execute the extraction, and clear the valley. Questions on the sequencing? Pierce said. Darko had one. ROE on the compound perimeter? Weapons free inside the outer wall once extraction is confirmed. Anyone engaging the assault element prior is a threat. Emily's ROE? This from a quiet operator named Santos, who hadn't said much to her directly, but who asked operational questions the way someone asked them when they actually wanted to know the answer. Pierce looked at the map, then at Emily. Wolf Actual engages at her discretion on confirmed threats to the assault element. She is not to fire on the compound until the assault initiates. And if there's a threat to her position, Santos pressed, then she handles it. Pierce said it flatly, which in Pierce's register could mean anything. Emily said nothing. Loadout confirmation at 1400, Pierce said. Everyone eats before then, that's all. The armory at 1400 was organized chaos. 12 operators pulling their specific kit, double-checking, adjusting, the particular kind of focused noise that preceded a real operation. Emily arrived and went to her designated station. Her ammunition allocation was there. Her radio was there. Her backup communications gear was there. She picked up the radio, powered it, and ran a frequency check against the mission packet. The primary frequency listed was correct. The secondary, the one she'd use if primary was lost or compromised, read 43.225. She checked it twice. Then she found Webb, the armory sergeant, at the far end of the counter. Corporal, she said, my secondary frequency in the mission packet, 43.225. Can you verify that against the base communications log? Webb took her packet, looked at the frequency, then pulled up the comms log on the armory terminal. He scrolled. He scrolled again. That's not in the log, he said. What's the correct secondary? For your call sign, it should be 43.775. Emily looked at the packet. The number was clearly printed, 43.225. Not a transcription error, not adjacent keys, not a simple transposition. A deliberate 50-cycle difference that would have left her with a dead secondary in the field. She stood at the counter for a moment. Fix it, she said. Print me a corrected sheet and I need your initials on the original as received. Webb hesitated, not from reluctance, but from the sudden awareness that he was being asked to document something that somebody hadn't intended to be documented. Sure, he said slowly. Yeah, give me a minute. He printed the corrected sheet. He initialed the original. Emily took both, folded them precisely, and put them in the breast pocket of her kit beside the olive drab notebook. She went back to her station. Darko had been at the adjacent station. She wasn't sure how much he'd heard. She didn't look over. She heard him resume moving gear without comment, which was its own kind of answer, set. At 7600, Pierce called a secondary brief for team leaders only. Emily was not a team leader. She was a provisional attachment. She sat in the bunk room and ate a protein bar and drank water and studied the topographic map of the Overwatch Ridge until the contour lines were part of her. The shelf at 900 meters, the approach route from the secondary LZ, 2 alternate positions she'd identified in case the primary was compromised, the dead ground on the north face that would give her cover if she needed to move. She thought about the secondary frequency. She thought about the scope cant and the missing landmark and the altered authentication codes. She laid them next to each other in her mind the way she'd lay spent casings out on a bench. Not judging yet, just ordering. Each one, individually, could be explained. Equipment wore out. Maps had errors. Administrative staff made mistakes. Frequencies got transposed. But the pattern of who they affected was specific. Every single discrepancy had landed on her station, her packet, her gear. Not Darko's, not Santos's, not any other operator who'd gone through evaluation alongside her. Only hers. She sat with that for a while. The bunkroom wall had a hairline crack running from the upper left corner of the window down toward the floor. She'd noticed it the first night and forgotten it. She looked at it now. It had the particular path of a crack that had been there for years, following the line of least structural resistance, going where the material was weakest. She thought about her brother Marcus. He died on a mountain, in circumstances that were still classified. She'd filed the FOIA request twice, once 18 months after his death, once 6 months ago. Both times the response was the same: records not available for release. Exemption B1, classified national security information. She'd never been given a satisfactory explanation for why his unit had been where they were when the contact happened. She'd been told the mission parameters were sound. She'd been told it was a field error, unexpected enemy contact, the unpredictability of mountain warfare. She'd been told to accept it. She hadn't. She'd just run out of avenues. She folded the topographic map, put it in her thigh pocket, and went to find something else to eat before the insertion. The helicopter pad at 2:45 was cold. Cold in the specific way of high-altitude nights. Not wet cold or wind cold, but the dry, absolute cold of elevation, the kind that moved through fabric efficiently and reminded you that this terrain was not designed to accommodate human beings and didn't particularly care about the accommodation attempts. Ghost Spear loaded in 2 groups. The assault element boarded the primary bird, a blacked-out MH-60 variant with external tanks for the range requirements. Emily boarded the secondary helicopter alone, except for the 2-man flight crew, which was a different experience from insertion with a team. The silence in the cargo bay was not comfortable silence. It was operational silence, the absence of conversation that meant everyone was in their own preparation. She was in hers. The secondary LZ was a narrow shelf on the ridge above the valley, barely enough flat ground for a helicopter to hover and offload. The pilot didn't land. He brought the aircraft to a 3-foot hover and held it there while Emily stepped off onto rock in the dark. And then the aircraft was gone before her eyes had fully adjusted, pulling off into the black with its running lights off and disappearing against the mountain. She stood on the rock shelf in the dark and the cold, rifle slung across her body, pack settled on her shoulders, and listened. Mountain wind. Stone. Distant echo of rotor wash fading south. Nothing that shouldn't be there. She pulled her night vision monocular, scanned a full 360, confirmed the immediate area was clear, and began moving. The route to the Overwatch position took 47 minutes. The map said 35. The map had been prepared by someone who had calculated movement time on the ridge path without accounting for the loose shale on the upper section. Not quite scree, but close enough that every third step required weight redistribution to avoid slide. Emily moved at the pace the terrain actually permitted, which was slower than the planned pace, and noted the discrepancy for her own awareness without letting it become stress. She'd be at her position before the assault element reached the valley floor. That was the margin that mattered. She found the shelf. It was better than the map suggested in some ways. Natural rock berm on the forward edge. Decent prone position behind it. Line of sight to the compound's main approach, and 3 of the 4 perimeter positions marked in the intelligence package. The wind at this elevation came from the northwest at a consistent 10 to 12 knots with occasional gusts. Readable, manageable. She set up. Bipod into a natural depression in the rock. Body angle. Cheek weld. She'd done this sequence enough times that it had the quality of language. Not thought, but expression. The muscle memory articulation of a specific intention. She keyed her radio. Wolf actual. On position. Radio check. The response came back through the primary frequency. Santos's voice, crisp. Wolf actual. Ghost 6 reads you 5x5. Assault element at phase line alpha. Copy. Wolf actual is set. Clear line of sight to compound approach and perimeter positions 1 through 3. Position 4 is blocked by terrain feature northeast. Understood. Keep eyes on. She put the scope to her eye and the compound came in. Small cluster of structures, 2 vehicles parked inside the outer wall. Light sources from 3 windows, no external movement at the moment. She began a slow, systematic scan. Perimeter position 1, 2 personnel, 1 armed, casual posture. Position 2, 1 personnel, stationary. Position 3. She couldn't hold it yet, the angle was wrong. She'd need the assault element to move another 300 meters before the geometry worked. She settled in. The rock was cold through her kit. The cold moved in from below and above simultaneously, a compression that would become uncomfortable in an hour and painful in 3. She'd been in Overwatch longer. She regulated her breathing and began the particular practice of waiting that snipers developed. Not patience in the passive sense, but active, sustained readiness. The discipline of a mind that stayed present without burning itself out. An hour passed. The assault element checked in at each phase line. Santos's voice was calm and regular, giving her the information she needed without unnecessary traffic. At phase line Charlie, approximately 2 kilometers from the compound, Santos keyed in. Wolf actual. We're seeing additional vehicle at the compound, not in the package. Emily was already looking at it. It had arrived 11 minutes ago, coming from the eastern approach road, and she'd been tracking it since it parked. 2 personnel had exited and gone into the main structure. The vehicle itself was a medium-weight truck, canvas-covered bed. She'd been trying to determine if the bed was loaded, and from 900 meters at night, even with good glass, it was an interpretation. Ghost 6 Wolf actual. Vehicle arrived at 22:18. 2 packs entered main structure. Bed canvas suggests possible load, can't confirm contents at this distance and light condition. Recommend treating as unknown threat asset until confirmed. Copy. Wolf actual. Passing to Ghost 1. Ghost 1 was Pierce, running command from a position behind the assault element. His acknowledgement came back 30 seconds later, his voice carrying the particular quality of someone processing a variable they didn't like. Wolf actual. Ghost 1. Can you get any indication on that truck before we hit phase line Delta? She was already working it. She moved her point of aim, not to the truck directly, which wouldn't help, but to the light source spilling from the main structure's eastern window, the one nearest where the 2 personnel had entered. If they were loading or prepping cargo, there might be movement back to the vehicle. There was. One of the 2 personnel emerged from the structure carrying something long and narrow, wrapped. He took it to the truck, returned, emerged again with a second package. Ghost 1, Wolf actual. Activity at main structure, personnel making multiple trips to the vehicle. Packages. Unknown contents, but the handling pattern is consistent with weapons transfers, not personal gear. They may be moving material ahead of schedule. A pause. Understood, Pierce said. Continue observation. At 23:10, 30 minutes ahead of the assault window, something changed in the compound's behavior that Emily noticed before she had language for it. The guard at perimeter position 1, the casual, shifting presence she'd been tracking for over an hour, had been relieved 20 minutes ago, standard rotation. The replacement was different, still. Oriented correctly, not relaxed watching, but alert watching, weight distributed the way people distributed it when they expected something rather than when they were passing time. Position 2 had also rotated, same behavioral shift. Position 3, now visible to her as the assault element had repositioned, showed the same pattern. Emily's breathing slowed. She did not key the radio immediately. Keying the radio prematurely was a way to introduce noise when she needed to be certain. She spent 60 seconds on each position in sequence, reading, rereading, comparing the current posture to the baseline she'd established over the past 90 minutes. Then she keyed. Ghost 1, Wolf actual. Go, Wolf actual. Guard rotation at all 3 visible positions occurred simultaneously 20 minutes ago. Replacement personnel are demonstrating alert posture, oriented, weight forward, consistent scanning pattern. This is not standard rotation behavior. They're expecting something. The radio was quiet for 5 seconds. Wolf actual. Wolf actual, are you saying the compound is aware of our approach? I'm saying the guard behavior changed in a way that's inconsistent with a routine rotation. Could be shift discipline. Could be something else. You should know. Another silence, longer. Copy, Pierce said. His voice had shifted, not alarm, but the compression that happened when a competent person started revising a plan under time pressure. Go 6, hold it Delta. I want eyes from a second position before we continue, Santos acknowledged. The assault element held. Emily kept watching. The compound held its altered tension like a coiled thing, no overt activity. No lights changing, no personnel movement beyond the guard positions. But the texture of it was wrong, the same way a clearing could look empty and still feel wrong to someone who'd spent enough time in terrain where people tried to kill you. 10 minutes passed. Pierce came back on. Wolf actual Ghost 1. We're getting pressure from higher to maintain the timeline. Asset transfer window closes at 0300. We need to move. Understood, sir. Your read on the guard behavior. Is it confirmed hostile awareness or possible? She thought about how to answer that honestly. Possible, not confirmed, but the change was simultaneous across all positions, which is unusual for routine rotation. A unit expecting contact doesn't always advertise it with overt activity. Sometimes it just looks like everyone suddenly remembers to pay attention. Silence. Ghost. 1. What's your call? Pierce asked, and the fact that he was asking her when he could have simply ordered the element forward meant something. She wasn't sure yet exactly what. My call, she said, is that you should know the shape of what you're walking into before you walk into it. I can't give you certainty from this position. I can give you my read, which is that this compound is behaving differently than it was 90 minutes ago, and the change maps to the arrival of that vehicle. All right, Pierce's voice settled into decision. We adjust the approach. Go 6, swing the element north of the creek drainage. Add 200 meters to the approach. Give us additional concealment before we're at the wire. Santos acknowledged. The element began to move. Emily tracked the compound. Nothing overt changed. But the guard at position 1, the one whose stillness she'd been reading for 30 minutes, turned his head toward the south drainage at 2329 and held there for 4 seconds, oriented on exactly the route the assault element had been using before Pierce's adjustment. She keyed immediately. Ghost 1. Position 1 guard just oriented south on the original approach route. He's looking for you. The response was instant. Ghost 6, halt. The element stopped. They know the original route, Pierce said. It wasn't a question. Position 1 guard is looking directly at where your element would have been on timeline if you'd continued south. A long pause. How? Darko said, his voice coming in from Ghost 6 position. Not a radio discipline question, but an operational one. The kind that surfaces when a plan starts to feel like it was never actually a plan. Nobody answered it on the radio. Emily thought about the intelligence package, the altered coordinates, the missing enemy strength data. The position dispositions that, even with Brennan's overlay correction, had still felt slightly off in a way she hadn't been able to fully articulate during the brief. She thought about the pattern she'd been assembling in the olive drab notebook. She didn't say any of it on the radio. She wasn't certain enough. And on an active mission, the threshold for certainty was not the same as in a bunk room. Certainty in the field had to be earned against the specific facts in front of you, not assembled from pattern recognition that might be wrong. Ghost 1, she said. Recommend you pause at current position and reconfirm intelligence on enemy strength and distribution. I'm seeing positions 1 through 3 active and alert. I have not been able to confirm position 4 due to terrain. If there is a 4th position and it's covering the northern approach, then we'd be walking into their alternate coverage, Pierce finished. Yes, sir. The radio was quiet for 30 seconds. In operational time, 30 seconds was a substantial commitment to silence. Go 6, Pierce said finally. Hold current position. I'm calling a deliberate pause. Wolf actual. I need you to find position 4. Copy. Give me time. You've got 15 minutes before the window pressure becomes critical. Finding position 4 required Emily to move. Not far. 30 meters north along the shelf, to a secondary rock formation she'd identified as an alternate during her initial setup. The movement was slow, controlled, staying below the berm line, no silhouette against the sky. She'd done this before. The difference between doing it in training and doing it now was the compound below her and the 7 personnel inside it who might be oriented on this ridge line. She settled into the secondary position. The angle was different. She could see around the northeastern corner of the compound wall now, into the dead ground that Position 3's line of sight hadn't covered. There was a fighting position there. 2 personnel. A crew-served weapon. She couldn't identify the exact system from this angle and light condition, but the profile was bipod-mounted, crew-operated, and oriented northeast. Not south toward the original assault route. Northeast, covering the northern approach that Pierce had just ordered the element to use. Her stomach went tight in a way that had nothing to do with cold. Ghost 1. Wolf Actual. Found Position 4. Northeast corner, outside the compound wall. Crew-served weapon, 2 personnel. Oriented northeast. She paused 1 beat. It's covering your adjusted approach route. The silence on the radio had a different quality now. Say again, Wolf Actual. Position 4 is covering the north approach. They anticipated your adjustment. She heard Darko's voice, low and tight. They knew the original route, and they positioned for our contingency. That's what the geometry suggests, Emily said. Pierce's voice came back, and it was the flattest she'd heard it. The kind of flat that meant a very controlled person was doing a great deal of very rapid thinking. Wolf Actual. The intelligence package for this mission. In your evaluation of it. Anything you saw that didn't add up. It wasn't casual. He was asking because he needed the answer. She took 2 seconds. Valley orientation overlay was corrected before final ops order. I flagged that during brief prep. Enemy strength figures felt low for the compound size in the imagery, but I didn't have a specific basis, just pattern recognition from prior missions. And the fighting position distribution in the original package didn't account for the northeast dead ground. She paused. It accounts for it now. The people who positioned that crew-served weapon knew that ground. Meaning they've operated in this valley before. Or someone who briefed them knew the terrain. The radio went quiet again. Then Pierce said something she hadn't expected. Wolf Actual, I need your honest read. What does the full picture tell you? She looked at the compound. At Position 4 with its crew-served weapon covering the north approach. At the simultaneously rotated guards. At the vehicle with its loaded bed. At the timing of all of it. It tells me, she said carefully, that this compound was prepared for us. Not for a generic military response. For this approach. This timing. This route structure. Someone who knew our operational planning communicated it forward. She stopped. Then, Sir, I think the asset transfer may already have happened. I think we're looking at a reception, not a handoff. Complete a silence. Darko said quietly, off what might have been an open mic. She's saying we were set up. No one corrected him. Pierce's voice, when it came back, had changed in a way Emily couldn't fully categorize. The compression was still there, the control, but underneath it something else had moved. Ghost 6, hold position, no movement. Then, Wolf Actual, keep eyes on. I'm making a call to hire. Copy. She kept her eye to the scope. The compound sat in the mountain dark, alert and prepared, waiting for them to walk into it. And somewhere at the back of Emily's mind, the pattern in the olive drab notebook, the equipment, the frequencies, the maps, the timing, clicked into an arrangement that was no longer ambiguous. She pressed her cheek against the stock of a rifle that wasn't calibrated correctly, on a mountain where someone had sent her to fail, and she kept watching. Pierce was on the command frequency for 4 minutes. Emily knew because she counted, not deliberately, but the way a person counts anything that has consequence. The seconds stacking up in the back of her mind while her eyes stayed at the scope and the compound below held its prepared stillness. 4 minutes on a secure command channel during an active hold was a long time. It meant the person on the other end either had significant information to deliver or significant resistance to provide. When Pierce came back to the tactical net, his voice had changed again. Not in the compressed decision-processing way from before. Something harder had moved into it. Wolf Actual Ghost 6. Hire confirms the intelligence package is validated. They're ordering us to proceed on the original mission parameters. Emily kept her eye to the scope. Position 4. 2 personnel. Crew-served weapon-oriented northeast. Still there, still waiting. Ghost 1, she said, keeping her voice level. Define original mission parameters. The approach route, south or north? North. The adjusted route. She looked at the crew-served weapon covering the north approach. Sir, Position 4 is still oriented northeast. If the element moves on the north route at current enemy disposition, They will have a crew-served weapon engaging at approximately 200 meters when they clear the last terrain feature. I understand, Lieutenant. The word lieutenant landed differently than it had in the briefing room 3 days ago. Not dismissive, something closer to pained. Hire says the intelligence is sound, Pierce continued. They say your read on position 4 may be a defensive emplacement for the compound's own security, not oriented on our approach. Emily moved her point of aim to position 4 again. She looked at the angle of the weapon's bipod, the arc of coverage implied by the operator's body position, the direction of the spotter's head, which hadn't moved from its northeast orientation in 7 minutes. Sir, she said, the weapon's arc of coverage based on bipod angle and operator positioning covers a 40-degree sector oriented on azimuth, approximately 035 to 075. Your north approach route enters that sector at the 200-meter mark from the compound wall. Silence. I know, Pierce said. More silence. Then Darko's voice, low and tight on the tactical net. Ghost 1, we're going to take contact the second we clear that last rock feature. I know that too. So what are we doing? The radio held 5 seconds of dead air. Pierce said, we're proceeding. Hire has ordered it. Move the element to the start of the north route and hold for my mark. Emily heard the element begin to move. The subtle shift of radio traffic, the brief check-ins from the 4-man subgroups as they repositioned. 12 people moving in the dark toward a compound that was waiting for them. She took one slow breath. Then she keyed. Ghost 1, Wolf Actual. Request clarification on my ROE. Your ROE stands as briefed. Clarify engage conditions on position 4. A pause. Confirmed hostile action against the assault element. Defined confirmed. Weapons fire, Lieutenant. Which meant she was cleared to engage after they opened up. After the burst came down on 12 operators clearing a rock feature at 200 meters from a crew-served weapon. After the first men were hit. She looked at position 4. She looked at the north approach route, tracing it in her mind from the element's current position down through the creek drainage, up over the last terrain feature, into the kill zone that 2 people and a bipod-mounted weapon were currently covering. She thought about the secondary frequency in the mission packet, the scope cant, the missing landmark, the authentication codes, the overlay, the fact that every single irregularity since she'd arrived at Black Ridge had been aimed at her, exclusively, with a consistency that was no longer explainable by administrative error. She thought about Marcus, about classified circumstances and exemptions, and the word accept. Ghost 1, she said. Go. I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it as a field observation, not an accusation. I don't have time to build the full argument. A beat. Talk. The pattern of equipment irregularities I experienced during evaluation. Rifle, maps, authentication codes, frequencies. Every single one was specific to my station and nobody else's. Tonight my secondary radio frequency was wrong in the mission packet by 50 cycles. It was corrected before insert because I caught it, but someone put the wrong number in. Those aren't random administrative errors. They're targeted. She stopped for exactly 1 second. And this intelligence package has the same texture, specific errors that create specific consequences, the valley overlay, the strength figures, the position 4 blind spot. Someone built these errors in. The tactical net was quiet. When Pierce spoke, his voice was careful in a way that meant he was being careful specifically because he wasn't sure he disagreed. Wolf Actual. Are you saying this mission was designed to fail? I'm saying the pattern is consistent with it. I can't tell you who or why from this position. I can tell you what I'm looking at, and what I'm looking at is 12 operators about to walk into a prepared position that higher command just told you is not a threat. Dead air. Then Darko. Ghost. I need a decision. We're at start point. Pierce said nothing for 3 seconds. Then, hold at start point. Wolf Actual. What do you need to confirm position 4 as a threat? I need them to orient on the element. If they shift arc when your people appear at the terrain feature, that's confirmation. And if they do shift, then I engage before they fire. That's outside your ROE. Yes, sir. Another silence, this one with weight in it. Wolf Actual, Pierce said. I can't authorize you to fire outside your ROE. I understand, sir. I also can't order you not to exercise your field judgment as the only operator with eyes on that position. She heard exactly what he was saying. Copy, Ghost 1. Have the element appear at the terrain feature, Pierce said. Briefly. Controlled exposure. We see what position 4 does. Ghost 6, you heard that? He asked Darko. Heard it. Santos, take point. 2 seconds of exposure at the feature, then back. Santos's acknowledgement was a single click. Emily moved back to primary position and put her eye to the scope. She settled her breathing. She found position 4. She found the crew-served weapon. She found the spotter beside it. She did not have a clean shot on the weapon. The angle from primary position gave her the crew but not the weapon itself. Engaging the crew would stop the immediate threat, but leave the weapon operable for anyone else who reached it. She needed to be at secondary position. 30 meters north. The position she'd used to find position 4 in the first place, the one that gave her angle on both the crew and the weapon mount. She moved, slowly, below the berm line. 30 meters in 90 seconds, which was not fast but was as fast as she could go without silhouette risk. She settled into secondary position, found the weapon in her scope, found the crew, found the spotter, whose head was still oriented northeast. She keyed. Wolf Actual is at secondary position. I have the weapon and crew. Ready. Ghost 6, controlled exposure on my mark, Pierce said. 3 seconds. Mark. She heard nothing. Santos was 900 meters below her and the mountain swallowed sound. But she saw position 4 respond. The spotter's head came off the northeast orientation and snapped to the terrain feature. He said something to the gunner. The gunner's body shifted. Not dramatically, but the shoulders rotated. The weapon's arc changed, tracking left toward the feature. They were moving the gun. Ghost 1, Wolf Actual. Position 4 is tracking. Weapon shifting arc toward the terrain feature. This is hostile orientation. Ghost 6, back, Pierce ordered. Back, Santos confirmed, and Emily assumed they'd cleared the feature. The position 4 gunner held the new arc for 4 seconds, then relaxed slightly. Searching, not acquiring. They moved when your people appeared, Emily said. Pierce said nothing for a moment. Then, Wolf Actual. This decision is yours. She understood what he meant. He couldn't authorize it. He couldn't order it. He told her exactly that. But he'd also just watched his operator walk into controlled exposure and watched position 4 track them. And he'd just told the only person with eyes on the threat that the decision was hers. It was giving her the choice he couldn't make for her. She took a breath. She found the gunner in her scope. The scope cant was 2 degrees. She'd already compensated. The elevation turret's inconsistency above 900 meters. She was at 900 exactly. She'd be working at the edge of the problem range. She adjusted her hold. The bipod rattle was mitigated by the paracord shim, but she'd know the outcome in roughly 1.3 seconds. Wind was 12 knots, northwest, consistent for the past 40 minutes. She found the gunner, she found the weapon mount. She could take the crew first and then move to the weapon. Or she could take the weapon's feed mechanism first and deny its use regardless of crew. The feed mechanism was a smaller target, at 900 meters with a cant-compensated hold on a moisture-compromised elevation system. Smaller was harder. She chose the crew. She breathed out. She fired. The first round went downrange in 1.31 seconds. She was already working the bolt before she heard the distant crack of the round arriving. Sound traveled slower than the bullet, and she'd learned years ago not to wait for it. She acquired the spotter, who was reacting to the gunner going down, and fired the second round while the spotter was still turning to understand what had happened. 2 rounds, 2 seconds. Both crew down. She keyed. Ghost 1, Wolf Actual. Position 4 is neutralized. 2 personnel down. Weapon is cold. The radio was silent for what felt like a long time, but was probably 4 seconds. Darko said, "What just happened?" Wolf Actual engaged position 4, Pierce said, his voice completely flat. Both crew down. Weapon is cold. A beat. Ghost 6, move the element. Now. Moving, Darko said. Then, not quite under his breath. She dropped 2 at 900 in the dark. The element began to move. Emily cleared her rifle, reloaded, and put her eye back to the scope. The mission wasn't over. Position 4 was cold, but there were 3 other positions, and a compound full of people who'd just heard 2 bodies hit the ground. Except they hadn't. That was the thing about suppressed fire at 900 meters in a mountain environment. The crack arrived as directional ambiguity, especially to people whose attention was oriented elsewhere. The positions 1 through 3 were still showing the same alert but static posture. Nobody was running. Nobody was orienting on the ridgeline. She had time. Maybe 40 seconds before the crew at position 4 was supposed to check in on their internal net, or before someone walked past and saw them. Ghost 1. Wolf Actual. Compound hasn't reacted yet. 40-second window. Estimate. Ghost 6. Push hard, Pierce ordered immediately. Get to the wire. The element accelerated. She watched the north approach through her scope, tracking the assault element's movement by the map she had memorized rather than by visual. She couldn't see them in this terrain in light, but she knew where they were, and she knew where the threats were, and she kept her attention on the threats. At 38 seconds, position 2 guard oriented sharply toward the northeast corner of the compound, toward where position 4 was. Ghost 1. Compound is reacting. Position 2 orienting on position 4. Ghost 6. Breach? 30 seconds, Darko said. The position 2 guard pulled a radio from his chest rig. He was transmitting. Whatever was about to happen fast. Wolf Actual. The moment they go active, your weapons free inside the compound walls, Pierce said. Copy. The position 1 guard turned and started moving along the compound wall. Not running, but purposeful. The movement of someone responding to a communication. He was moving toward the northeast corner. She tracked him. He reached the corner, stopped, looked. She saw him see position 4. He turned and shouted something, and the compound went from alert to active in under 3 seconds. Lights, movement, the position 3 guard raising a weapon, someone inside the main structure emerging at a run. Ghost 6, Ghost 1. Compound is active. They know. Breaching, Darko's voice. She heard it in the distance. The compressed sound of a breach charge, the flat crack of controlled demolition muffled by the mountain air. Then the immediate surge of tactical radio traffic as the element went through the wire. She went to work. Position 1 guard was raising his weapon, orienting on the breach. She fired. She didn't wait to confirm and moved immediately to position 3, who was cycling toward the breach point at a run with his weapon up. Second shot. She didn't feel it the way people who hadn't done this described. There was no removal from consequence, no shutdown of empathy. It was more like tunnel vision, the scope, the target, the wind, the trigger, the outcome, and then immediately the next thing requiring her attention. The weight of it existed, she knew from experience, but it moved to a specific place during action and stayed there until after. The compound was loud now, with the sound of the assault, muffled by distance and mountain terrain but unmistakable. She could hear it through the radio traffic, the sharp compression of controlled detonations, Darko calling positions, Santos calling contact in clear and rapid sequence. Ghost 1, Wolf Actual. Positions 1 and 3 are down. Position 2? Ghost 6 has 2, Darko answered directly. Position 2 is down. Inside the main structure, we have 3 rooms, 2 cleared, 1 locked. Asset? Looking. She swept the compound perimeter. No additional personnel visible at the walls. The vehicles, the original 2 and the arrival from earlier, were parked and still. The truck with the canvas bed was a question she hadn't resolved. Ghost 1, Wolf Actual. The arrival vehicle, canvas-covered truck. I have not confirmed contents. If that bed is personnel, they're a threat that hasn't surfaced yet. Copy. Ghost 6, watch the truck. Watching, Santos said. The canvas moved. She saw it from 900 meters. A shift along the rear edge, not wind, the specific movement of something with weight and intention underneath it. Ghost 1, truck bed is active. Personnel in the... The canvas came off. Not one person. 4. And they were not emerging slowly. They came out with weapons up, already oriented on the breach point where the assault element had entered, and the element was partially inside the compound with limited awareness of the flank. She fired before she'd finished processing the word 4. First round, leftmost target, the one whose weapon was most advanced toward firing position. Second round while working the bolt, second rightmost, eliminating the other end of the arc, collapsing the threat inward. The middle 2 were still reacting when rounds 3 and 4 went down range. 4 rounds, 4 seconds. Her breathing was wrong. She'd rushed the sequence and her chest was tight. She forced a controlled exhale and worked the bolt on an empty chamber, reloaded, and went back to the scope. The truck bed was still. Wolf Actual Ghost 6, Santos's voice, high and tight. What just happened to the truck? 4 personnel from the bed. They're down. Silence on the tactical net. Then Darko, and his voice had something in it she hadn't heard from him before. She just cleared our 6, from 900 meters. In the dark, Santos said. Ghost 6, focus, Pierce said, but his voice wasn't sharp. It was something else. Focused. 3rd room is breached. Looking for asset. Emily swept the compound again. The 2-story main structure, the vehicles, the perimeter. The access road from the east where the truck had arrived hours earlier. The access road had movement. A single vehicle, running without headlights, coming from the east at speed. Ghost 1, Wolf Actual. Single vehicle, eastern access road, no lights. Moving fast toward the compound. Estimate 90 seconds to the gate. Hostile? Unknown. Running dark on an active site suggests they know what's happening here. Ghost 6, time to asset confirmation? 30 seconds. We have a man. Can't confirm identity yet. Wolf Actual, can you stop that vehicle? She looked at the road. The vehicle was a sedan, moving at what she estimated was 80 kilometers per hour on an unpaved mountain road, which meant the driver knew it well. At current distance and closing speed, she had a window. I can stop it, she said, but if it's carrying the asset or a friendly element, I'm shooting at friendlies. ROE, Pierce said. Your call. She tracked the vehicle. It was not slowing for the compound. A vehicle arriving to support the extraction would slow, orient, establish communication. This one was accelerating. Shooting, she said. She put the first round through the engine block. The vehicle lurched, lost power, momentum carrying it another 40 meters before it rolled to a stop against the road's edge. No detonation, no fire, just a dead vehicle at an angle in the road. 2 people exited. Running toward the compound, armed, she fired twice more. The road went still. Vehicle is stopped, she said. 2 additional personnel armed, now down. From inside the compound, Darko's voice cut through. Ghost 1, we have the asset. Confirmed, he's ambulatory. One of ours. Copy. Extraction route? West wall, same as planned. Wolf Actual, cover the west extraction, Pierce said. She moved back to primary position, which had the angle on the western compound wall and the extraction route beyond. She settled in. Her arms were starting to shake slightly. Not from cold, from the sustained tension of rapid-fire sequences. The adrenal cost of sustained high-stakes decision-making. She pressed her cheek to the stock and let the familiar weight of the rifle settle the shake. It mostly worked. The element extracted through the west wall in good order. She counted them as they moved. Darko, Santos, 4 more, the asset between them, 4 more, then 2 rear security. 12 operators and 1 asset, moving northwest along the extraction route toward the alternate LZ. No pursuit. The compound behind them was quiet and dark. She watched it for 4 more minutes as the element moved away, covering their back trail, waiting for anything that had been missed. Nothing moved. Wolf Actual, element is at extraction LZ. What's your status? She looked at the compound one more time, at the position she'd engaged, at the truck, at the road. Wolf is clear, moving to extraction point. Copy. Exfil in 8 minutes. She stood up from the rock shelf. Her knees were stiff from the cold and the sustained prone position, and something in her right hip flexor had developed the specific ache of muscles held at a fixed angle for too long. She packed in the dark by feel. Bipod folded, scope cap on, rifle slung. She pulled her pack back on. She stood on the rock shelf for a moment, looking down at the valley. 6 shots from position 1, counting the neutralization of the crew-served threat. 2 at position 3. 4 from the truck. 2 at the road vehicle. 14 rounds total. She would account for everyone. That was something she'd decided years ago. Not as procedure, but as personal discipline. Every round had a consequence, and every consequence had a weight, and she would not let herself go numb to the weight of it. She would feel it later, when there was time to feel it, and she would file it with the other things she carried. Right now there was a ridge to descend in the dark, and an extraction helicopter with a clock on it. She turned from the compound and started moving. The extraction LZ was a flat gravel shelf at the base of the ridge, barely adequate for the MH-60's footprint. Emily arrived with 90 seconds to spare and found the assault element already in their stick positions. Darko at the rear, Santos at point, the asset seated center with 2 operators flanking. Nobody said anything when she approached. She took her position at the rear of the stick. The helicopter came in low and fast, flared at the last moment, and the crew chief had the door open before the skids touched. The element loaded with the efficiency of people who had done this in worse conditions. Emily was last on. The helicopter lifted before the door was fully closed. She sat with her rifle across her lap and her back against the cargo bay bulkhead and looked at the operators around her. Some had their eyes closed. Santos was doing a weapons check by feel, the habit of someone who'd learned that idle hands in a helicopter defaulted to anxiety. Darko sat with his forearms on his knees and his eyes forward, expression unreadable. The asset, a thin, older man in civilian clothes with the specific bearing of someone who'd spent significant time in the field despite the civilian clothes, looked at Emily directly across the cargo bay. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he gave a single nod, slow and deliberate, the kind that meant something specific from someone who'd learned to communicate in compressed signals. She returned it. The helicopter banked south and the valley disappeared below them, and the Carrick Range spread out in the dark like something that didn't care what had just happened in it. The wind at altitude rocked the airframe. The engine noise was total. Darko opened his eyes and looked at her. The cargo bay noise made conversation impractical, which was probably fine for both of them. But he looked at her the way she'd looked at position 4, cataloging, measuring, arriving at a conclusion. Whatever the conclusion was, she couldn't read it. She looked out the small cargo bay window at the mountains. She thought about the mission package, the altered coordinates that she'd caught, the enemy strength that had been deliberately understated, the position 4 blind spot in the original intelligence, the specific surgical way each error had pointed the assault element toward a kill zone while leaving the documentation clean enough to blame on field failure. She thought about who had access to the intelligence package after final approval. She thought about who had told Pierce on a secure command channel to proceed on a mission that any competent field observer could see was compromised. She thought about the word hire. She pulled the olive drab notebook from her breast pocket. She couldn't write in the helicopter. Too dark, too much vibration. But she held it in her hands for the flight south, the way some people held things they didn't want to lose. The weight of the notebook was small and specific, and the most important thing in her kit. By the time the helicopter crossed back over Black Ridge and began its descent to the landing pad, she had assembled the shape of something large enough and serious enough that she wasn't sure what happened next. She was sure of one thing: whatever had been planned for Ghost Spear tonight had not been planned by the enemy in the Carrick Valley. Someone closer had written that plan, and that someone had watched it fail from a comfortable distance, and was still out there, and still had the rank and the access and the willingness to try again. The helicopter touched down. The rotor wash pulled at everything loose on the landing pad. Pierce was standing there, which was not standard. COs did not typically stand on the landing pad for a returning element. He was in his jacket, not his kit, which meant he'd gotten back separately and waited. He watched the element offload. When Emily stepped off last, he looked at her for a moment. The same flat cataloging look from the briefing room, from the range, from the corridor outside his office. Then he said, over the rotor noise, "My office. Soon as you clear your weapon." She nodded. She walked toward the armory with her rifle and her notebook and the weight of 14 rounds in a pattern that had taken 3 days to assemble and about 40 seconds to confirm. Behind her, on the landing pad, Pierce stood in the rotor wash and watched her go. And somewhere in the back of the base, in the secure communications room where the encrypted traffic ran in and out of rear command, a message was already composing itself, time-stamped, classified, addressed to a brigadier general's personal inbox. It read, "Mission failed. Asset recovered. Team intact. Wolf actual performed." There was a longer pause in the sender's head before they typed the last 3 words of the actual message. "She's going to talk." Pierce's office at 0215 was cold in the way of rooms that hadn't been heated for the occupants' convenience. The base HVAC ran on a schedule, and 0215 was between cycles. A single desk lamp was on. The tactical display along the wall was dark. Pierce stood behind his desk rather than sitting, which Emily had learned meant the conversation was going to be short, or hard, or both. She'd cleared her weapon, logged her ammunition expenditure with Webb, who had written down the number 14 without comment, but whose pen had stopped moving for a half-second before it started, and walked to Pierce's office without changing out of her field kit. She still had mountain dust on her jacket, and the specific smell of cold elevation on everything. She sat down without being asked. Pierce looked at her for a moment, then pulled his own chair out and sat. "Start from the beginning," he said. "Not the radio traffic, before that." "How far before?" "Arrival at Black Ridge." She opened the olive drab notebook on his desk. He looked at it. "This is a log," she said. "Dates, times, discrepancies, serial numbers, frequency records, map reference numbers. I started keeping it on day 1. Pierce was quiet for a moment. Day 1. The rifle at initial evaluation was from a different rack than the ones issued to other operators. I noted the serial number. The scope cant was approximately 2 degrees. I noted that. The bipod had a rattle I mitigated with paracord. The elevation turret showed moisture contamination. None of those things are individually unusual for range equipment. But combined with the missing landmark on my navigation map, which I also noted, with the grid reference of the missing feature, and the altered authentication codes on the first radio evaluation, the patterns started to feel specific. Pierce looked at the notebook without touching it. "You didn't bring this to me." "I brought the authentication codes to you. You said you'd look into it." A silence. "I didn't," he said. "No." He absorbed that. His jaw moved slightly, the way a person's jaw moved when they were deciding how much of something to put on themselves. "Continue," he said. "Tonight's mission packet. The secondary frequency in my comms assignment was wrong by 50 cycles. I caught it at the armory and had Webb initial the original document before correction. That's in the notebook. The intelligence package had the valley orientation error that Brennan corrected, but the enemy strength figures remained low, and Position 4 was not represented in the original fighting position layout, despite being a natural defensive emplacement for that compound. Someone who knew the compound's defensive geometry would know about that corner." She paused. "And someone told the compound we were coming. The guard rotation, the crew-served weapon oriented on our contingency approach. That's not coincidence. That's specific information about our operational planning." Pierce had both hands flat on the desk. "You said all of this on the radio," he said. "Parts of it." "Parts. I wasn't certain enough for all of it in the field." "And now?" "Now I'm certain enough." He looked at the notebook, then at her. "Who?" he said. "I don't know. I know the pattern of what they did, and I know it required access to the mission intelligence package after final approval, access to the base communication systems for frequency assignments, and access to evaluation administration for the performance documentation." She stopped. "And I know it required someone with enough authority that when you called higher on that hold and told them the compound was prepared, they ordered you to proceed anyway." Pierce's expression didn't change, but something behind it went very still. "I didn't tell higher the compound was prepared," he said. "I told them we were at a hold and requested updated intelligence assessment." "What did they say?" "They said the package was validated and the mission was time-critical and to proceed." "Did they ask why you were holding?" A pause. "No," he said. Emily let that sit. A competent intelligence officer receiving a call from a field commander requesting updated assessment on an active mission would ask why, would ask what the field was showing, would ask what the hold was for. The failure to ask those questions was itself a kind of answer. "Sir," she said, "whoever called you back, are you certain of who you were speaking to?" Pierce looked at her for a long moment. "It was authenticated through secure protocol," he said. "Authenticated to whose authorization code?" He didn't answer immediately. The authentication system for secure command communications ran through individual officer codes, 2-factor, time-stamped. But the validation confirmation that a field commander received was a text indicator, not a voice print. If someone with access to the system had used another officer's code. "I need to make some calls," Pierce said. "Yes, sir." He stood up, picked up the notebook and looked at it, then set it back down in front of her. "Keep that on your person," he said. "I intend to." He started toward the door, then stopped. "Hayes." He turned. In the desk lamplight, his face showed something she hadn't seen on it before. Not softness, exactly, but the specific exhaustion of a person realizing they've been moving through a constructed reality for longer than they knew. "The evaluation conditions. The equipment. I want you to understand something." She waited. "I didn't authorize those conditions," he said. I told myself I had because it was easier than asking who did. That's on me. She looked at him. I know, she said. He left. She sat alone in his office for a moment, the notebook on the desk in front of her, the desk lamp throwing a small circle of light on the olive drab cover. Outside, the base was shifting into the particular activity that followed a returned element: debriefs, equipment logging, the medical check that everyone submitted to even when nobody wanted to admit they needed it. She could hear voices in the corridor, Darko's among them. She picked up the notebook and put it back in her breast pocket. Well, the mission debrief assembled at Yo 300 in the TOC. Fulgo Spear, plus Captain Brennan, plus 2 officers. Emily hadn't seen before, a major in service dress who'd apparently arrived at the base while the mission was running, and a civilian in a field jacket whose identification badge was face down on the table. The civilian had the specific compact attentiveness of someone from an analytical branch, the kind of person who listened more than they spoke and remembered everything they heard. Pierce ran the debrief from the front of the room. He went through it in chronological sequence: insert, movement, hold, the position for identification, the engagement sequence, the breach, the asset recovery, the extract. He was methodical and fair. He stated what each element had done and when, and what the outcome had been. When he reached the engagement sequence, he looked at Emily. Wolf actual engaged position 4 prior to weapons-free authorization, he said. 14 rounds total expended. Results? 6 confirmed hostile KIA, 4 hostile KIA from vehicle ambush, 2 hostile KIA on the access road, 1 crew-served weapon denied, 0 friendly casualties, asset recovered. The room was quiet. I want to be clear about the sequence, Pierce continued. Wolf actual identified position 4 as an active threat to the assault element before that position fired. She communicated the threat assessment to Command. Command was unable to authorize engagement outside established ROE. Wolf actual made an independent field judgment and engaged. The major in service dress, his name tape read Calloway, leaned forward slightly. Colonel, your ROE on the mission specified engagement upon confirmed hostile action, weapons fire. That's correct. Wolf actual engaged before weapons fire. Position 4 tracked the assault element when they appeared at the terrain feature, Pierce said. The crew-served weapon shifted arc to cover the element's route. In Wolf actual's field assessment, that constituted confirmed hostile intent. The crew-served weapon at 200 meters engaging the assault element would have resulted in probable mass casualties. Calloway looked at Emily. Lieutenant, walk me through your decision. She didn't look at her notebook. She'd been through the sequence in her own head 4 times on the return flight, and she had it ordered. Position 4 crew demonstrated hostile orientation by tracking the controlled exposure at the terrain feature, she said. The weapon's arc shift was deliberate and specific to the element's route. At 200 meters, a crew-served weapon engaging at the rate of fire that system is capable of would have put the assault element in a kill zone with limited cover and no lateral egress. The ROE required weapons fire for engagement authorization. In the time between weapons fire initiation and effective friendly response, the lead elements of the assault would have taken casualties. I made a field judgment that the threat was confirmed by intent and capability, not by the first round fired. Calloway held his pen against his notepad without writing. That's outside the established parameters, Lieutenant. Yes, sir. The ROE exists for a reason. Yes, sir. It also exists as a baseline, not a ceiling, for field judgment when circumstances create conditions the ROE didn't anticipate. The ROE was written for engagement against a threat that appeared in the expected configuration. Position 4 was an unexpected configuration identified through field observation that wasn't in the intelligence package. Why wasn't it in the package? The room was very quiet. Emily looked at Calloway steadily. That's a question I'd like answered as well, sir. Calloway's pen stopped moving entirely. The civilian at the table, the one with the face-down badge, hadn't moved in the last 5 minutes. He was watching Emily with the specific quality of someone who had been watching her for longer than this conversation. Pierce said, Major Calloway, there are aspects of the intelligence package for this mission that require examination before the debrief moves forward. Calloway looked at him. Colonel? The mission intelligence was compromised, I believe intentionally. The room temperature changed again. The same way it had changed when Emily first walked into the briefing room 3 days ago, but different in character. That first shift had been dismissal. This one was something closer to alarm. Calloway said carefully, "That's a significant claim." "It's supported by documented evidence," Pierce said, "beginning with the evaluation period for Lieutenant Hayes." He looked at Emily. She pulled the notebook from her breast pocket and set it on the table. The debrief became something else at that point. It took 40 minutes. Pierce walked through the notebook's contents. He'd clearly reviewed it in the time between their conversation and this assembly, because he presented it with the specificity of someone who had read it carefully. Every discrepancy, every date and time, every serial number and frequency log, every notation Emily had made over 4 days. Calloway stopped writing halfway through and just listened. The civilian turned his badge face up at some point. It read, Defense Intelligence Agency, and below that a clearance indicator that made Brennan, who glanced at it, sit slightly straighter. When Pierce finished, the DIA officer, he'd introduced himself as Reyes, just the single name, spoke for the first time. "The frequency discrepancy in the mission communications packet," he said. "Do you have the original document?" Emily produced it from her breast pocket, the original with Webb's initials, the corrected sheet beneath it. Reyes took it, looked at it. "Corporal Webb initialed this," he said. "He can confirm." "He will." Reyes set the document down on the table in front of him. "The authentication protocol used for the command communication you received during the operational hold. Colonel Pierce, I need the exact time and authentication string." Pierce had written it down. He passed the paper across. Reyes looked at it for a moment. Then he pulled a small, encrypted device from his jacket pocket, entered something, and waited. The device produced a response. His expression didn't change, but something around his eyes did. A compression, the face of someone whose working hypothesis has just been confirmed in the way that is not satisfying. "The authentication string matches the authorization code of Brigadier General Victor Harrow," he said. "Rear Command." The name landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Darko said, from the back of the room, "Harrow. He's the Theater Intelligence Authority. He has authority over the intelligence package chain," Reyes confirmed. "He has access to the communications authentication system. He has oversight authority for personnel evaluation documentation at forward units." A pause. "He has all 3 access points that were used." Calloway had put his pen down. "What are you saying?" he said, though his voice suggested he knew. "I'm saying that the authentication string used to order Colonel Pierce to proceed on a compromised mission belongs to Brigadier General Harrow. I'm saying that the intelligence package errors trace to the package handling at Rear Command, which is under Harrow's authority. And I'm saying that the evaluation documentation irregularities for Lieutenant Hayes, which I've been examining for the past 72 hours independently of this notebook, because this investigation was already open before tonight, show alteration signatures consistent with access from Harrow's administrative staff." The room was completely silent. Emily sat very still. "How long has this investigation been open?" Pierce said. 6 weeks, Reyes said. "We had financial irregularities in procurement, missing funds from 3 classified programs. Harrow's programs. We were working backward from the money when the pattern expanded." He looked at Emily. "Your transfer orders arrived in our secondary file 2 weeks ago." The timing of the transfer, the specific unit, the specific personnel profile, young officer, no allies at the unit, high profile enough to carry blame, junior enough to be credible as the point of failure, fit a pattern we'd seen in Harrow's previous operations. Emily heard the words "previous operations" and felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the mountain. "Previous operations," she said. "How many?" Reyes looked at her. "2 that we've confirmed," he said. "1 that we suspect." "The suspected one," she said. Her voice was level. She'd made it level deliberately, pressing against the thing trying to move up through her chest. "What unit? What theater? What time frame?" Reyes was quiet for a moment, the quiet of someone deciding how much to say and when. "Lieutenant," he said carefully. "Captain Marcus Hayes," she said. "Mountain reconnaissance, 4 years ago, Karak Range." She held Reyes's gaze without blinking. "Was my brother's unit one of them?" The room, 12 operators, 2 officers, 1 intelligence officer, became absolutely still. Reyes looked at her for a long moment. That file is still active, he said. I can't confirm or deny its connection to this investigation in this forum. That's not a denial, she said. No, he said quietly. It isn't. She held that for exactly 3 seconds. Then she picked up the olive drab notebook from the table in front of her, smoothed the cover once with her thumb, and put it back in her breast pocket. She did not cry. She was not built for crying in rooms full of people who were watching her, and she had learned a long time ago that grief expressed in public became something it wasn't. Performance, spectacle, evidence of something that could be used. She would feel it later, in a room by herself, with the specific fullness that came from finally having a shape to put around something that had been formless for 4 years. Right now, she was in a debrief. Darko, at the back of the room, had his arms crossed and was looking at the floor. Santos was looking at the wall. Several other operators were looking at nothing in particular, which meant they were looking at the inside of their own heads. Pierce was looking at Emily. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he said, not in a commander's register, but in the register of a person speaking directly to another person. I'm sorry, for my part in it. She looked at him. Your part in it was what Harrow needed, she said. He needed a CO who would look at the evaluation conditions and accept them at face value. He needed you to doubt me enough that when the mission failed and I was the one to blame, your doubt would validate the narrative. She paused. You don't have to carry that the way you're carrying it. He was using your professionalism against you. That's what he does. Pierce held her gaze. That's a generous read, he said. It's an accurate one. Calloway cleared his throat, which in a room this quiet was almost jarring. We need to discuss next steps. If the authentication evidence holds and the documentation trail is what Mr. Reyes is describing, we're looking at a general officer under investigation for falsifying intelligence, operational misconduct, misuse of command authority, and potentially culpable negligence in personnel fatalities. Nobody in the room moved. Harrow needs to be notified of the investigation, Calloway continued. He already knows the mission failed, Reyes said. He'll have received communication from his asset in the compound, or the absence of communication, which tells the same story. He knows this didn't go as planned. Then he knows it's coming. He's known it was a possibility since Lieutenant Hayes qualified at 48, Reyes said, and several people in the room looked at him with the specific expression of people encountering a number in an unexpected context. We monitor Harrow's secure traffic as part of the open investigation. He received a message the night of the qualification. 4 words. She qualified. 48. The response he sent back is part of our file. Darko uncrossed his arms. He was watching her evaluation, Darko said. He arranged her transfer, Reyes said. He watched every part of it. The operators around the room were going through the specific reckoning of people who had participated in something, the dismissal, the mockery, the skepticism, and were now seeing the frame that participation fit into. Kessler, who had said she's not here because she's qualified on the first day and had said wind dropped on the qualification range, was sitting with both hands on the table in front of him and a particular quality of stillness. Emily did not look at any of them for this. This was not the moment for it. Not for satisfaction or vindication or any of the things that moment could be. There were operational priorities. What do you need from me? She asked Reyes. The notebook, he said. A full written account of every discrepancy and sequence, signed and dated. Webb's testimony on the frequency document. And a sworn statement on the infield intelligence assessment, the specific elements of the package that you identified as wrong and when you identified them. The last one matters because a sworn statement from the field operator documenting specific, dated intelligence errors that trace back to Harrow's authority chain is evidence that's harder to classify and suppress than internal communications. He looked at her steadily. He's going to try to suppress this. He has the rank and the access to make some of it disappear. We need documentation in multiple forms, from multiple sources, so that all of it disappearing becomes impossible. He'll come at her, Darko said from the back. Reyes looked at him. Almost certainly, Reyes said. He's currently at rear command. He has access to personnel systems. He can initiate a formal complaint against Lieutenant Hayes for the unauthorized engagement tonight, the ROE violation, before we can get the investigation to a stage where it protects her. The ROE violation that saved 12 operators, Santos said. The ROE violation nonetheless, Reyes said. He'll use it because it's there to use. He doesn't need it to succeed. He just needs it to create noise and delay. Pierce said, "What's the timeline on the investigation moving to formal action?" "Depends on how fast the authentication evidence processes through JAG and how fast we can lock the documentation chain. 48 hours minimum, possibly 72. That's a long window for Harrow to work in. Yes, Reyes said. It is. The room sat with that. Emily thought about 48 hours, in which a general officer with access to personnel systems, communications infrastructure, and command authority would have time to construct a counter-narrative. She thought about how a counter-narrative would look. The ROE violation, framed as a dangerous independent operator whose judgment was questionable, whose transfer had always been a mistake, whose qualification score had been a statistical anomaly on a favorable day. She thought about how that narrative would land with people who hadn't been on the mountain tonight. She thought about the olive-drab notebook in her breast pocket. "I want copies of this notebook made tonight," she said. 3 physical copies. I want one with you. She looked at Reyes. One with Colonel Pierce, and one transmitted to a person outside this command chain who I designate. Reyes raised an eyebrow slightly. Who do you have in mind? She thought about who she trusted outside this room. The list was specific and short, people she'd known long enough and in circumstances real enough to mean something. A JAG officer at Bragg, she said, Major Diane Wolk. She handled my FOIA requests on my brother's file. She knows the case history, and she has the clearance. Wolk, Reyes repeated, as if filing it. She'll know what to do with it if something happens to the chain of custody here. Pierce looked at her. You think he'd move on the evidence directly? I think a man who arranged a mission designed to kill 12 operators and blame the deaths on me is not going to feel limited by evidentiary protocols, she said. Nobody argued the point. Make the copies, Reyes said. I'll authorize the transmission to Wolk. It was 0430 when the debrief formally closed. The operators filed out with the particular quiet of people who had a lot to process and not enough time or space to do it. Kessler passed Emily in the doorway and stopped. He was a big man. He'd been one of the loudest, earliest voices in the dismissal. Not cruel exactly, but certain in the way of someone who had never had to question the foundations of their certainty before. He stood in the doorway now and looked at her. The qualification range, he said. I said the wind dropped. She waited. It didn't, he said. I knew it didn't when I said it. He looked at the floor, then back up. I said it anyway because I didn't want to deal with what 48 meant. I know, she said. That's... He stopped. Started again. That's not who I'm supposed to be. No. He nodded once, the slow kind, and moved out. She walked out after him into the corridor. Darko was waiting at the junction point, leaning against the wall. He'd been waiting deliberately. She could tell by the angle, the patience of someone who'd positioned themselves to intercept. Walk, he said. They walked toward the east corridor, toward the bunk rooms. You knew from day one, he said, or close to it. I had a feeling from day one. I had a pattern from day 3. Why didn't you push harder? She considered the question honestly. Because I didn't have enough, and I knew it. Pattern recognition isn't evidence. And because pushing harder without evidence would have produced exactly the outcome Harrow wanted. An officer who creates friction, who accuses the command structure without proof, who confirms every negative assumption the unit had about her. So you waited. I documented. There's a difference. I was quiet for a few steps. The truck, he said. 4 targets in the truck bed. You got all 4. Yes. In sequence, in the dark, at 900 meters, while also managing the compound and the access road. She didn't say anything. I've been doing this for 11 years, Darko said. I've worked with some exceptional shooters. He stopped at the junction outside her bunk room. I've never seen that. She looked at him. 14 rounds, she said. I'll account for all of them. I know you will. He paused. For what it's worth, and I know it's not worth what it should be because I should have asked these questions earlier. Where did you actually come from? Before Bragg? Before the rotations? She held the notebook in her pocket without taking it out. You know the 142nd Mountain Reconnaissance Unit? She said. He stilled. Marcus Hayes's unit. He was my brother. I went to his unit after sniper certification, 3 years before he died. She kept her voice level. After he died, I transferred to standard support assignments for about a year. Then Bragg. Then here. Darko looked at her. The 132nd, he said. They're black program assets. Their qualification pipeline is... He stopped. That's why the 48. They train at altitude on variable terrain with equipment that isn't always current, she said. You learn to shoot with what you have. He was quiet for a moment. What Harrow did to your brother's unit, he said. If that's what Reyes was implying, I don't have confirmation yet. But you think... She looked at the hairline crack in the wall above her bunk room door, the one that followed the path of least resistance through the material. I've thought it for 4 years, she said. I just didn't have the shape for it. Darko stood in the corridor and said nothing for a moment. Get some sleep, he said finally. Reyes is going to need you coherent for the sworn statement. I know. He started back down the corridor. Darko, she said. He stopped. The math, she said. Unknown equals untrusted. You told me that the first night. He turned halfway. I remember, he said. You recalculated, she said. It wasn't a question. He looked at her for a moment, and then for the first time since she'd arrived at Black Ridge, something in his face that had been held at a professional distance moved. Yeah, he said. I did. He walked away. She went into her bunk room and sat on the edge of the metal bed frame in the dark. The high window let in the first pale edge of pre-dawn. Not light yet, but the suggestion that light was coming, the sky shifting from black to the specific dark blue of a mountain morning. She pulled the notebook from her pocket. She opened it to the first page. Day 1, the rifle serial number, the scope cant measurement, the bipod notation. Her own handwriting, compressed and precise, the shorthand she'd built over years of writing in conditions that didn't accommodate good penmanship. She thought about Marcus. She thought about classified circumstances and exempted records and the word accept. She thought about what Reyes hadn't confirmed and hadn't denied. She put the notebook on her knee and held it there and sat in the dark bunk room with the mountain wind against the high window. And she stayed very still, the way she stayed still behind a rifle, the way she stayed still in Overwatch. Not passive, not resigned, but the particular active stillness of someone who has identified the target and is waiting for the conditions to be right. She had the shape of it now. In 48 hours, or 72, or however long it took for the authentication evidence and the documentation chain and Reyes's investigation to reach the point where it could no longer be classified or suppressed or made to disappear, she would have more than the shape. She would have the proof. And somewhere at rear command, in a building with a generator hum and a map table and a secure phone, a brigadier general with stars on his shoulders had received the absence of confirmation from a compound in the Carrick Valley and was sitting with the specific knowledge that his carefully constructed plan had come apart, and that the person who had dismantled it was a lieutenant he'd chosen specifically because she had no allies. He'd been wrong about that. She closed the notebook. Outside, the first helicopter of the morning shift crossed the ridge line, running lights blinking against the pale dark sky. It wasn't over. But for the first time since she'd stepped off the transport helicopter onto this base 4 days ago, the terms had changed, and she had changed them. She slept 3 hours. Not well. The sleep of someone whose mind kept surfacing through shallow water, catching on details and releasing them. The olive-drab notebook pressing against her ribs through the fabric of her jacket because she'd fallen asleep without taking it out. She woke at 0730 to the sound of helicopters and lay on the metal bunk for 2 minutes, doing nothing except listening to the base come fully alive around her. Then she got up. The corridor was busy in a way it hadn't been at this hour before, people moving with purpose rather than routine, voices carrying the compressed energy of something unfolding. She stopped a passing operator she recognized from the assault element, a quiet man named Okafor, who'd been rear security on the extraction. "What's happening?" she said. He looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen directed at her on this base before, not quite deference, but something adjacent to it. "Military police arrived from rear command about an hour ago," he said. 4 vehicles. They're in the TOC with Reyes." "Harrow?" "Nobody's saying his name out loud yet." Okafor paused. "But yeah." She walked to the mess, drank 2 cups of coffee standing at the counter, ate half a protein bar, and went to find Reyes. The TOC had 4 people in it she hadn't seen before, 2 in MP uniforms with the specific bearing of people executing a directive rather than investigating one, and 2 in service dress whose rank insignia she processed in a single glance. Both colonels, one from JAG, one from the Inspector General's office. Reyes was at the table with his encrypted device and a stack of printed documents. Pierce was there too, standing at the edge of the room with his arms crossed, watching. Reyes looked up when Emily entered. "Good timing," he said. "The authentication evidence processed through JAG at 0600. The documentation chain is locked." He set down the device. Harrow's authorization codes appear on 4 separate access events in the past 3 weeks. The intelligence package for last night's mission, the communications assignment system for this base, the evaluation documentation archive, and an access to personnel records for your transfer file specifically. The JAG colonel, her name tape read. Foster looked at Emily. "Lieutenant Hayes, your sworn statement from last night has been entered into the record. We need one additional piece of information from you." "Sir?" "Your evaluation performance reports as they appeared in Colonel Pierce's file. Did you ever see them directly?" "No, sir. I saw my own range scores and exercise times as they were called out by range officers and exercise supervisors. I never saw the documentation that went to Colonel Pierce." Foster looked at Pierce. "The reports I received showed her qualification scores as adequate," Pierce said, his voice carrying the specific flatness of a man who had stopped softening things. "Adequate. Not exceptional. Not the actual numbers." He paused. 48 out of 50 would not appear in any document I received as adequate. Someone changed the numbers before they reached me." "Changed to what specifically?" Foster asked. 39. The reports in my file show 39 out of 50. The room was quiet. 39 was below unit standard. 39 was the number that would have let Pierce send her back without argument if he'd gotten there before the mission window forced his hand. Emily thought about Harrow in his rear command building, watching the qualification results come in, reading 48 and understanding that the number he needed was 39, and making the change himself or ordering someone to make it. The cold arithmetic of a man constructing a failure in someone else's name. "He changed the score," she said. Not a question. "The access log for the evaluation archive shows an entry at 2341 the night of your qualification," Reyes said. "Harrow's authorization code. The file was accessed for 11 minutes. "That's when he called back," Pierce said. "I received the order to proceed as planned that same night. Same authorization code." Foster made a note. The IG colonel, a heavy-set man named Brackett, who had said very little but whose eyes had been moving constantly, spoke for the first time. "Colonel Pierce, the command order you received during the operational hold to proceed despite your field assessment. You followed it." "I did." "Knowing what you know now, how do you characterize that order?" Pierce looked at Brackett steadily. "I characterize it as a fabricated order using a stolen authorization methodology, designed to override legitimate field judgment and send 12 operators into a prepared kill zone." A beat. "And I characterize my compliance as a failure of independent verification that I intend to account for in my own after-action." Brackett studied him. "That's an honest answer. It's the only one I've got." The door to the TOC opened and Darko entered, followed by Santos and 3 other operators. They'd apparently been waiting in the corridor, not called, just waiting, the way people waited when they understood something significant was happening and wanted to be present for it. Pierce looked at them, then back at the room. "Where's Harrow now?" Emily asked. Reyes looked at his encrypted device. "As of 0645 Rear Command, he's been informed that an investigation is active. His legal representation has been notified." "He hasn't been detained?" "The formal charges are being finalized. Detainment comes when the charge sheet is complete. That process is..." Reyes checked his device. "Approximately 2 hours out." "So he's had all night and this morning," she said. "Yes." She thought about what a man like Harrow would do with a night and a morning. Whether he would try to run, unlikely. Generals rarely ran. It conceded too much. Whether he would try to suppress. The documentation was locked now. Reyes had said so. Copies in multiple hands, including Wolk at Bragg. Whether he would construct a counter-narrative and push it hard through whatever channels remained available to him. Almost certainly that last one. "The ROE violation," she said. "Is he filing?" Reyes met her eyes. "He filed at 0200 this morning. formal complaint, unauthorized engagement, conduct unbecoming, and a slight pause. A recommendation for field evaluation review on the basis that the qualification score of 39 raised concerns he had previously flagged internally. The 39 he had fabricated himself. Santos said, from near the door, his voice tight. He's using the score he falsified to undermine the investigation into the falsification. He's creating noise, Reyes said. He doesn't need it to succeed. He needs it to complicate, to delay, to give him room. Does it? Emily asked. Give him room? Reyes looked at her for a moment. It did, he said, until about 40 minutes ago, when Admiral Ethan Ward's office contacted this investigation directly. The name landed quietly, but with weight. Admiral Ethan Ward was commander of Naval Special Warfare, the top of the chain that Ghost Spear operated under, a position so senior that his direct contact with a field investigation was not routine and was not casual. Ward knows, Pierce said. Ward has known since 0400, Reyes said. He received a briefing from Foster's office when the authentication evidence processed. He's been on secure communications with JAG and the IG since then. Reyes set the device down. He's not pleased. With several things. He looked at the room in a way that distributed the several things across everyone in it without being specific. He's flying in, Reyes added. ETA approximately 2 hours. The 2 hours had a specific quality. The base continued its routines, equipment logging, maintenance cycles, the mechanical rhythm of a forward installation. But underneath it, something was taut. People knew something was happening without knowing the full shape of it, and the operators of Ghost Spear moved through the base with the particular self-consciousness of people who had been inside a significant event and were waiting to find out what it meant. Emily spent 40 minutes with Foster giving the full sworn statement, detailed, sequential, reference to the notebook, every discrepancy in order from the first day to the last radio transmission. Foster recorded it, had it transcribed by a specialist, and had Emily sign each page. At one point, Foster looked up from the transcript and said, "You started the notebook on day 1. "Yes, sir." "Before you had enough for a pattern." "I had a feeling on day 1. The notebook was discipline, not certainty." Foster looked at her. "Where did you develop that habit?" "Mountain reconnaissance," Emily said. "You're in the field for weeks at a time with minimal communication. You document everything because you can't predict what will matter later." "The 102nd?" Emily looked at her steadily. "You've read my file." "I've read what's in your file," Foster said carefully. "Parts of your service history prior to Bragg are redacted." "I know. Do you want to speak to that?" Emily thought about the right answer, about what was useful now versus what was personal, and whether those two things were aligned. "My brother Marcus served in the 142nd before I did," she said. "He's the reason I sought that assignment. I wanted to understand what he'd done and how he'd done it. The 142nd's training pipeline is what it is. The qualification standards are higher than standard sniper school. The conditions are worse. The equipment is often older because the program doesn't have the procurement visibility of Tier 1 units." She paused. "That's where 48 comes from. That's the background." Foster wrote something. "And your brother's death," she said quietly, "is part of what Reyes is investigating," Emily said. "I expect to be informed of what they find. Whatever the outcome, I intend to pursue full disclosure on his file. That's separate from this." "Is it?" Foster asked, not challenging, genuinely asking. Emily was quiet for a moment. "No," she said. "Probably not. But I'm keeping it separate in here." She touched her chest briefly. "Because if I don't, I'll stop being useful and start being something else." Foster looked at her for a long moment. "All right," she said, and returned to the transcript. Admiral Ward's helicopter came over the ridge at 10:40. It landed on the main pad, not the secondary, and the ground crew was at attention without being told, the instinctive response to a certain level of rank arriving in a certain way. Word had spread through the base in the efficient, sourceless manner of forward installation communication. By the time Ward stepped off the helicopter, a significant portion of Ghost Spear had found reasons to be in the vicinity of the main courtyard. Ward was a tall man, older, with close-cut gray hair, and the kind of deliberate physical composure that came not from effort, but from decades of having learned that composure was a form of communication. He wore no ceremony, just his service uniform, no hat in the mountain wind. He shook Pierce's hand first, brief and firm, spoke to him for 30 seconds. Then he walked toward the TOC. He passed through the courtyard where operators were assembled, not formally, just present, the gathering that had happened without an order being given. He stopped. He looked at the assembled men. Then he looked at Emily, who was standing at the edge of the group because she hadn't been sure whether she belonged in it or at the margins of it. She was still in her field kit from the night before, the dust of the Carrick mountain range still on her jacket, the olive-drab notebook in her breast pocket. Ward walked toward her. The courtyard went very quiet, the kind of quiet that happened when 12 people who were not accustomed to going quiet all went quiet at the same moment. He stopped 2 feet in front of her. He looked at her the way someone looked at a thing they needed to see directly before they could say the right thing about it. Then he removed his gloves. He tucked them into his left hand. He stood perfectly straight, pulled his right arm up, and rendered a full military salute. Not a nod, not a handshake. A salute, formal, deliberate, the kind that meant something specific from someone of his rank directed at someone of hers. Emily came to attention and returned it. He held it for 3 full seconds. When he dropped it, he said, "Lieutenant Emily Hayes." "Sir?" "You didn't just save Spear last night." She didn't say anything. There was nothing to say yet. "You exposed a failure inside our own command structure that we should have caught before it reached you, before it reached your brother." His voice didn't waver on that last part, but it changed weight. "You did it without allies, without support, without the basic professional fairness that every operator in this unit is owed from their first day. You documented it, you held it, and when the moment came, you acted." She was aware, in the periphery, of every operator in the courtyard, of Darko standing 3 meters to her left, of Santos beside him, of Kessler at the back of the group, of Pierce standing slightly apart from the formation. "The ROE violation complaint filed against you this morning has been reviewed and dismissed," Ward said. "The engagement was within the scope of field judgment under the conditions present. The documentation supports that. The outcome supports that." He held her gaze. "I support that." She kept her eyes forward. "There will be a full formal inquiry into Brigadier General Harrow's conduct," Ward continued, his voice carrying now to the full courtyard without effort. "The charges include falsification of intelligence, operational misconduct, misuse of command authority, and unauthorized manipulation of personnel evaluation and documentation. Additional charges related to prior operations are under active investigation." He paused. "He will be held to account, completely. That is not a statement of intent. It is a statement of fact." From somewhere in the formation, someone came to attention. Then another. Then, one by one, every operator in the courtyard raised a hand in salute. Not on order, not in sequence. The ragged, organic way of people acting from the same impulse rather than the same command. Darko's hand went up. Santos's. Kessler's. And his arm was the most deliberate of any of them, the specific precision of someone making a point about their own previous failure and choosing to make it visibly. Pierce's hand went up last, and when it did, it was straight and clean and held for longer than protocol required. Emily stood in the center of it, the salute surrounding her the way the mountain wind surrounded everything at Black Ridge, constant and indifferent to what it touched, except that this was neither constant nor indifferent. This was chosen. She did not cry. Her eyes were wet, and she did not cry. She stood straight, and she held the return salute until every hand had dropped, and then she dropped hers. Harrow was formally detained at Rear Command at 1400 that afternoon. Reyes sent Emily a brief message through the base communication system. 4 lines, factual, no commentary. She read it standing in the corridor outside the TOC and then folded the message and put it in the same pocket as the olive-drab notebook. The charge sheet was 17 pages. The inquiry into the 142nd's final mission, Marcus Hayes's mission, was formally opened as a connected investigation the following morning. Reyes told her himself, sitting across from her in the mess with 2 cups of coffee between them and the specific directness of someone who had decided she'd earned the truth without mediation. "We have communication records," he said, "between Harrow's office and the Regional Command Authority that authorized the 142nd's final deployment. The timeline is..." He stopped. "The timeline puts Harrow's involvement in the operational parameters before the mission launched. before your brother's unit was in the field. She held the coffee cup. He knew what they were walking into, she said. Reyes didn't answer immediately. The investigation will determine that, he said carefully. Reyes. He looked at her. Did he know? A long pause. The communication record, he said, suggests he had information that would have changed the operational parameters if it had been passed down the chain. Whether that constitutes knowing in the legal sense that the inquiry will establish, that's not my determination. He held her gaze. But yes, he had information. He didn't pass it. She set the coffee cup down on the table. She sat with it for a moment. 4 years of a shape that had no name, and now it had one. And the name was not a surprise. It was almost exactly what she'd suspected in the parts of herself she hadn't let speak out loud. Suspicion confirmed was not the same as grief resolved. It was just grief with better information. She picked up the coffee and finished it. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, Reyes said. The inquiry will take time. His legal representation is already filing for classification protection on the communication records. There will be a fight. There's always a fight. Yes. He looked at her. But the notebook is in 4 sets of hands now, and Ward is personally invested in the outcome, and the documentation chain is locked. The fight is going to be harder for him than it's been before. He's done this before, she said. 2 confirmed operations, possibly more. Yes. Those people deserve the same inquiry Marcus does. They're getting it, Reyes said. This opened all of it. Everything that connects to Harrow's authority chain over the past 8 years is now active. 8 years. She looked at the mess hall around her, the steel tables, the industrial coffee equipment, the particular institutional ugliness of a forward base that nobody had designed for comfort. The same kind of place Marcus had eaten in, had slept in, had cleaned his rifle in, had been in on the last morning before his last mission. She thought about the photo in her duffel pocket, the dress uniform, the grin. She would tell him, not in any literal sense, but in the private sense that people held conversations with people they'd lost, the internal dialogue that never fully stopped. She would tell him they had the shape of it now, that it had taken 4 years and an assignment that was designed to kill her, and a notebook she'd started on the first day because something felt wrong. She would tell him she'd kept shooting. Well, 2 days after Ward's visit, Pierce called her into his office. It was the same small room, the same desk lamp, same tactical display along the wall, same window facing into the mountain wind. He was sitting this time, which was different. He had a folder in front of him. Sit down, he said. She sat. He opened the folder. The provisional designation on your attachment to Go Spear, he said. I'm removing it, effective today. She looked at him. You're a full member of this unit, he said, with all corresponding standing, access, and designation. He paused. Call sign Wolf Actual is now your permanent call sign, if you want it. I'll take it, she said. He closed the folder. Then he put both hands flat on the desk and looked at her in the direct, unmediated way he'd looked at her the night of her qualification. The same quality of seeing someone clearly after having seen them through a constructed lens for too long. I want to say something, he said, and I want you to let me say it without telling me it's fine, or that you understand, or any of the things people say when they're being gracious. She said nothing. I read your evaluation file. The real one. Your actual service record, not what Harrow's office put in my documentation chain. The 142nd qualification. The field record in country. The prior mission logs. He stopped. You should never have been provisional. You should have walked into this unit at full standing and been evaluated on the same basis as anyone else. That didn't happen because someone built a picture of you before you arrived, and I accepted that picture without questioning the source. He looked at her steadily. That was a failure of command judgment. I won't dress it up. She held his gaze without filling the silence. All right, she said finally. That's it? You said don't tell you it's fine. Right, so I won't. She paused. But I'll tell you that the unit performed. On the mountain, under pressure, with bad intelligence and a compromised plan. They performed. That's a reflection of command. The rest of it was Harrow. Pierce looked at her for a moment. You're being generous, he said. I'm being accurate, she said. There's the difference. He almost smiled. It didn't quite get there, but the direction was right. One more thing, he said. Admiral Ward's office has asked for a recommendation on your next assignment. Given the active investigation and the visibility of the situation, there are several options on the table. You could stay with Ghost Spear. You could take a liaison position with the inquiry team, which Reyes has requested. You could take a training command position. He looked at the folder. Ward wanted your preference considered before anything was decided. She thought about it. She thought about the mountain shelf at 900 meters, and the compound below, and the 14 rounds, and the cold and the notebook in her pocket. She thought about the olive drab cover and the compressed shorthand and the way documentation was a kind of patience. The decision to trust that the truth, accumulated carefully, would eventually outweigh the constructed version. She thought about the operators who'd raised their hands in the courtyard, about Darko's recalculated math, about Kessler's deliberate arm. She thought about Marcus and the inquiry that was now active, and the 8 years of connected cases that had opened because she hadn't stopped documenting on day one. Ghost Spear, she said. Pierce looked at her. There's more work here, she said. The unit is good, and I haven't finished learning the terrain. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. The slow, specific kind. Good, he said. Then we have a briefing at 1400. New intelligence package, new mission window. I'd like your assessment of the terrain photography before then. She stood up. I'll need a better rifle, she said. Already ordered, he said. Calibrated, current model. Bipod without a rattle. She picked up the folder from the edge of his desk. He'd pushed it toward her, her copy of the formal unit designation, and walked out. The courtyard at Black Ridge in the late afternoon held the particular light of high-altitude evenings, thin and clear and honest, the kind of light that showed everything without flattery. The wind was consistent off the western ridge, 12 to 14 knots, the same wind that had been there every day since she'd arrived. She stood at the edge of the landing pad with the unit designation folder under her arm and looked at the mountain range. Somewhere in those mountains was the valley where the compound was, where the crew-served weapon had been, and the truck, and the access road, where 14 rounds had gone and not come back. Somewhere further in a different valley on a different ridge, was the terrain where Marcus had been when his unit walked into conditions that someone should have changed and didn't. She pulled the photo from her duffel pocket. The dress uniform. The grin. The specific joy of someone who had never second-guessed. She looked at it for a moment. She folded it carefully and put it back. The inquiry would take time. Reyes had said that, and he was right. The fight would be hard. Harrow's legal representation would file for classification, for protection, for delay. The documentation chain would hold, she believed that. But holding wasn't the same as winning quickly. It was the same as the notebook, daily discipline against the possibility of eventual use. She was prepared for that. She had been preparing for it, in some form, for 4 years. Darko appeared beside her without her having heard him approach, which was a professional compliment she chose to file and ignore. Ward's pilot is staying overnight, he said. Something about weather over the southern pass. That's fine. I wants to debrief you personally in the morning, before he leaves. All right. Darko stood beside her, looking at the mountains. You're staying, he said. It wasn't a question. Pierce must have told him. I'm staying. He was quiet for a moment. The unit's better with you in it, he said. It came out with the slight stiffness of someone who didn't say that kind of thing easily, which made it mean more. She looked at the mountain line. Don't let it go to your head, he added. I won't. He walked away. She stood in the thin, clear mountain light and felt the wind on her face and the weight of the notebook in her pocket and the weight of the folder under her arm, and she stood there until the light began to shift toward the particular gold of a high-altitude evening, and she let herself feel, briefly, privately, in the way she'd promised herself she would when there was time, the full weight of the last 4 days. The equipment, the dismissal, the mountain in the dark, the 14 rounds, the courtyard, the salute, Marcus. She let it be what it was. Then she turned from the mountains and walked back toward the operations building, where a new intelligence package was waiting, and a calibrated rifle had been ordered, and there was work that she was finally, completely, without reservation, authorized to do. The call sign Wolf Actual followed her in. It was no longer a joke someone had made at her expense. It was hers. The strongest person in any room isn't the one who is never doubted. It's the one who kept the record, held the line, and refused to become someone else's excuse, even when no one was watching, even when it cost everything, even when the only ally they had was the truth they'd written down on day one.